What if I took the classic Wraith trope and humanized it? What would come out of it? Hi, I'm Shepherd Fox. Welcome to the Insolent Crown. In this episode, I want to share with you my firstborn race, the race closest to magic and the spirit world, the Valdeien, a race of wraiths. In my world, everything begins at the very foundation. When I conceptualize, I delve deep, almost down to the molecular level, because understanding what makes my world tick is important to me. The creation of my first race is no different. What physical traits define their identity? What drives their psychology? How does their unique physiology influence their survival and societal interactions? How quickly can they evolve? This isn't an exhaustive list, but it touches on many key points I want to eventually talk about, especially since the concept of races is something I'm deeply passionate about. I can't cover everything in one video, so you can expect more on the Valdeien in future episodes. So, what is this wraith-like race, and why wraiths in the first place? Let's begin with the basics. What exactly is a wraith? According to Google, a wraith is a ghost or ghost-like image of someone usually seen shortly before or after their death. But popular culture has expanded on this idea in fascinating ways. Take Tolkien's ring wraiths, for example. Dark servants of power and corruption, caught between the physical and the ethereal. The wraiths in the Wheel of Time are shadowy beings who serve an evil overlord. In many video games, wraiths appear as ghostly figures in dungeons, corrupted humans twisted by regret, curses, or nefarious pacts. And these are just a few examples. Wraiths are a staple in entertainment, a powerful tool that taps into our deepest fears, existential dread, and the terror of the unknown. They also strike a chord with our subconscious desire to leave this world with a sense of fulfillment. Beyond that, wraiths offer incredible potential for deep, complex character arcs. Storytellers often use them to mirror real-world struggles, illustrating how negative actions and emotions can consume a person, setting them on a path of no return. In many stories, death becomes the point where their eternal fate is sealed. Wraiths frequently serve as a stark warning. Choose the right path before it's too late. With these ideas in mind, what are the common themes associated with wraiths as a whole? A central theme in wraith lore is the concept of dying or fading away, often tied to a dark force. Whether it's a way of life, deep regret, or a more tangible entity, like a ruler or master. In most depictions, wraiths appear as transparent, ghostly figures, with parts of their bodies invisible to the naked eye, yet still capable of interacting with the world. Alternatively, they might be fully corporeal, but mentally broken, driven solely by primal instincts or the will of another. Another notable feature common in ghostly wraiths is their coloring. Many are portrayed in cool tones: purple, blue, green, and even white. From a color psychology perspective, this is intriguing. These hues can evoke a range of emotions and ideas, but when softened into pastel shades, as they often are, they carry an almost tranquil, peaceful quality, a striking contrast to the themes of hate, fear, and anguish typically associated with wraiths. So, why do I want to create a race? From the concept of a tormented soul? Well, to see if I can tame a monster. But how do you turn a monster into a relatable creature? Hyper-negative traits don't mesh well with a race that's meant to develop complex societal structures and interact with other races. If we were to take away their ability to engage in these aspects, they become nothing more than monsters, and that's not what I'm aiming for. So what's the most negative trait of wraiths, and how can we remove it in a way that still feels authentic? The answer lies in their eternal regret or servitude. A functional society cannot thrive with those dark elements hanging in the air. But we'll circle back to that idea later. Enter the Valdeien, whose name means eternal ruler. Let's talk about their proportions. When drawing humanoids, proportion is typically measured by head count. How many heads tall and wide the figure is, and the distances between major body parts using the same measure. For instance, real-life human proportions are about 7.5 heads tall. But in most entertainment, our natural proportions don't quite cut it. That's where heroic proportions come in. With most men drawn at 8 heads tall, a bit wider, and with naturally larger muscles, this is classic superhero material. Go a step further, and you'll find fashion proportions, where figures are 9 heads tall and slimmed down, shifting the focus to clothing rather than the body. Some characters push this even further to 10 heads tall, usually seen in supervillains with oversized muscles that dwarf their normal-sized heads. But I wanted to take this even further. You'll notice the red lines on my canvas marking each head height. My Valdeians stand between 11.5 to 12 heads tall, the tallest humanoids in my world. I've been studying how to alter human proportions realistically for a while now, and there's still much to learn. For my firstborn race, I wanted something larger than life, graceful, yet something to look up to in both literal and metaphorical senses. I decided to make them thin, to the point of near frailty, for 2 reasons. First, wraiths often have a ghoulish appearance, and aberrant qualities like elongated limbs align well with the ghostly and undead aesthetic. Second, as I examined different proportion examples, I noticed a pattern. 8 heads tall is bulky, 9 heads tall is thin, 10 heads tall is bulky again, and so on. It made sense to continue that cycle and make 11 heads a thinner race. Overall, I am pleased with their proportions so far. They may evolve over time, but for now, they work. Next, let's talk about their coloring. As I mentioned earlier, the colors I most associate with ghostly wraiths are blue, purple, green, and white. So, I decided that the Valdeien would have skin in these shades, each with its own variation. In these 2 examples, I'm showcasing lavender and blue-purple versions. You may also notice that their hair colors match their skin tones, but in darker, more saturated hues. Now, let's dive a bit into the science behind this phenomenon. In the real world, there's a structure known as photonic crystals. If you're familiar with the vibrant hues of blue butterflies, peacock feathers, or opals, then you've seen photonic crystals in action. They manipulate light in fascinating ways. What's even more interesting is that scientists have been experimenting with making these structures float using radiation, which sparked my imagination. I didn't delve too deeply into the science, but it inspired me to create my own rules. In the Valdeien, their hair is composed of photonic structures, and their skin, due to its color, emits specific types of radiation. Purple emits UV, blue emits X-rays, and green emits gamma rays. This radiation interacts with the hair, causing it to float, echoing the ethereal quality I want to capture. I also want to explore how hairstyles and materials can control where and when the hair floats. I imagine they could apply certain oils or waxes to weigh it down or reduce its receptiveness to the radiation. Maybe they even tie their hair to objects like feathers or flowers, getting creative with how it can be arranged when floating. On a side note, the radiation they emit from their bodies is harmless in the amounts they put out per day. A person would have to be in close contact with a Vald for weeks to start noticing any issues, I imagine. The last physical feature I'll cover in this video is their skin transparency, which is deeply intertwined with other aspects of their race. At birth, Valdeien infants are completely transparent, except for their faces. As they grow, around the age of 12, their bodies become fully opaque, with only the tips of their fingers and toes remaining slightly transparent. By the time they reach 25, they begin to fade again, with color gradually leaving their bodies, starting from their digits and creeping up to their faces. Eventually, as they approach the end of their lives, around the age of 50, fading away entirely. This gradual fading visually symbolizes their connection to the spiritual world. As newborns and dying elders, the Valdeien are closest to the spirit realm. Their transparent skin briefly reveals their bone structures, but even those begin to fade as they near the end. But this isn't the end for these individuals. Far from it. When a Vald passes on, they join a ghostly collective. The living Valdeien can tap into this collective as if they were speaking with a living being. The deceased retain all their memories and intellect from their time alive, and over generations, the Valdeien race accumulates a vast repository of knowledge from first-hand sources. This means that apprentices can access both ancient and contemporary tactics, techniques, and skills at any time. Given their short lifespans, Valdeien would likely start learning and perfecting their crafts at a very young age, under the guidance of their ancestors, reaching some level of mastery near their spiritual maturity, around 10 or 12. This concept is still a work in progress, but I imagine there would need to be some fragile element that holds this collective together, something so vital that the entire race would die to protect it, ensuring their connection to their ancestors remains intact. We'll explore that idea in a future video. Now, as I promised, let's revisit the negative trait I removed from traditional raids to create the Valdeien. Another concept I'm exploring is that of criminal punishment. While I haven't fully fleshed out the culture and society of this race yet, the idea of retribution naturally came to mind. What's the one thing that a short-lived race with the promise of an eternal connection to their people would fear most? Separation from the collective. A Vald who commits unforgivable acts against their people would be magically severed from the afterlife. Most Valdeien would live in accordance with societal norms, but if one strayed, committing murder, for example, they would be cursed to wander the realm as a half-spirit, half-Vald. A wraith. This separation from their people would, over centuries, drive them to madness, likely causing them to lash out against both Valdeien and other races in classic wraith-like retribution. Maybe this is also reflected in a lack of color, utilizing the white ghost look. I imagine these poor souls would have a measure of influence on the world, constrained by their remaining pool of magic or some other force. And once they've exhausted a certain quota of energy, they would fade into nothingness, doomed to be eternally forgotten. Their life force essentially serving as their way to interact with the world, to commit acts of malevolence. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the Valdeien. They've been a true joy to develop, but I'm just scratching the surface. If you're interested in seeing more videos about them, consider subscribing and liking the video. And please, leave a comment below. I could talk about these guys all day. In the next video, I'll be doing a character spotlight. This character is going to be a major driving force in narratives and a key figure in the journey across the globe. He also happens to share my namesake. See you there.